Lecture 3, Agile and Plan-Driven Processes. In this lecture we're going to cover Agile and Plan-Driven Processes, but we are going to concentrate on the Agile processes. Some of the notes again are from Ian Somerville's book. Let's reiterate what plan-driven and agile processes are. So plan-driven processes, all the processes and activities are planned in advance and progress is measured against this plan. In agile processes, planning is incremental and it is easier to change the process to reflect changing customer requirements. And as we mentioned in the last lecture, in practice most practical processes include elements of both plan-driven and agile approaches. And there really is no right or wrong software process, only which one. The only consideration you have to take is which one do you apply for which type of project. During this module we're going to look at two different approaches to development, which will be plan-driven and agile approach. The plan-driven development approach really is to software engineering is based around separate development stages, with the outputs to be produced at each of these stages planned in advance. Now, this is not necessarily a waterfall model. Plan-driven incremental development is possible. Iteration occurs within the activities. In agile development, specification, design, implementation, testing are all interleaved, and the outputs from the development process are decided through a process of negotiation during the software development process. So the agile development process really is more adaptable than plan-driven one, and in a way this is what has been done with spiral iterative style of models for years. The difference is that it has less formal structure and is far more adaptive. For instance, you have feature-driven development, adaptive software development, dynamic systems development method known as DSDM. That is the standard UK methodology. You have Agile Unified Process. Scrum is often put in with this as a methodology of Agile. Actually it isn't. Scrum is more managing the project, so it's a project management tool rather than a methodology. Okay, Agile software development process. Now, rapid development and delivery is now often the most important requirement for software systems. Now, that's not to be confused with RAD. I don't mean RAD. This development model adopts an iterative model as a baseline, whilst putting emphasis on the human factor, which is achieved by a software team, feedback throughout ongoing development process. That's what we mean by agile software development. Businesses operate in a fast-changing requirements, and it is practically impossible to produce a set of stable software requirements. Software has to evolve really quickly to reflect changing business needs. So, rapid software development, we mean by that specification, design and implementation are interleaved. System is developed as a series of versions with stakeholders involved in version evaluation. User interface are often developed using an IDE and graphical toolset to speed up this. Let's start on why people decided to use the agile methods. Dissatisfaction with the overheads involved in software design methods in the 1980s and 1990s led to the creation of agile methods. These methods focus on the code rather than the design. They're based on an iterative approach to software development. They're intended to deliver working software quickly and evolve this quickly to meet changing requirements. The aim of agile methods is to reduce overheads in the software process, e.g. by limiting documentation, and to be able to respond quickly to changing requirements without excessive rework. The Agile Manifesto was written in February 2001 at a summit of 17 practitioners, with some names you might have heard of: XP creator Beck, Crystal creator Coburn. The manifesto states, "We are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it." Through this work we have come to value individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, responding to change over following a plan. That is, while there is value in the items on the right, we value the items on the left more. We're going to go into the principles of Agile methods, taken from Agile Software Development Somerville. Customer involvement. Customers should be closely involved throughout the development process. Their role is to provide and prioritise new system requirements and to evaluate the iterations of the system. Incremental delivery. The software is developed in increments, with the customer specifying the requirements to be included in each increment. People, not process. The skills of the development team should be recognised and exploited. Team members should be left to develop their own ways of working without prescriptive processes. Embrace change. Expect the system requirements to change and so design the system to accommodate these changes. Maintain simplicity. Focus on simplicity in both the software being developed and in the development process. Wherever possible, actively work to eliminate complexity from the system. Times when the Agile method is most applicable. For instance, for a product development where a software company is developing a small or medium-sized product. If the custom systems development process within the organisation has clear commitment from customers to become involved in the development process, and they're used to doing that, and where there isn't a lot of external rules and regulations that affect the processes. The other time is if it's a small team. So if you have large teams, you have problems scaling Agile methods to large systems. So small, tightly integrated teams, great, that works fine. These are just some of the considerations that you have to consider whether the system you're going to develop is going to use an Agile approach or a plan-driven approach. Problems with plan-driven methods are well documented, and there's always examples of this. Oh yes, because it's waterfall, even though not all plan-driven methods are waterfall, and it's kind of heavy documentation, etc. But there are also problems with Agile methods, and let's have a look at a few. For instance, it can be difficult to keep the interest of customers who are involved in the process. In Agile methods, you need to have constant customer involvement. The other thing is that team members may be unsuited to the intense involvement characterises Agile methods. So you can have lots of things like Scrum, daily interventions, daily meetings or weekly meetings and things. It's much more intense. The other thing is prioritising changes can be difficult where there are multiple stakeholders. So if you have different stakeholders and they go, yeah, I want this done, which one are you going to change first? That can be quite difficult. Another aspect is one of the Agile principles is maintaining simplicity, but that requires extra work. And one of the biggest issues is contracts may be a problem, as with other approaches to iterative developments. So it's not just Agile that has a problem with contract. Any iterative type of development can have problems with contract. And as we stated earlier, that plan-driven can also have iterative types of development. Another problem is that with software maintenance. Now, most organisations spend more on maintaining existing software than they do on new software development. So if Agile methods are to be successful, they have to support maintenance as well as original development. And two key issues come up here. Are systems that are being developed using an Agile approach maintainable, given the emphasis in the development process of minimising formal documentation? And can Agile methods be used effectively for evolving a system in response to customer change requests? So, problem also may arise if the original development team cannot be maintained. No documentation, or very little documentation, it's very difficult for another team to come in and try and go, yes, okay, what do they do? Why do they do that? If there is no documentation, no design specification, no real system requirements that are in depth stating why they were done in the first place. Technical, human and organisational issues. Let's have a look at these. Most projects include elements of plan-driven and Agile processes. Now, deciding on the balance depends on a few factors. Let's go through these. Is it important to have a very detailed specification and design before moving on to implementation? Now, in some instances, this is the case. If you're doing something that's for a critical system, you need to have detailed specification and design before moving on to implementation. Now, if that's the case, you probably need to use a plan-driven approach. Is an incremental delivery strategy, for instance, where you deliver the software to customers and get rapid feedback from them, realistic? And if it is realistic, fine. Consider using Agile methods. How large is the system that is being developed? Agile methods are most effective when the system can be developed with small teams who can communicate informally. So if they're in the same building, that's great. But it may not be possible for large systems that require large development teams, and a plan-driven approach may have to be used. And it definitely is going to be more complicated if you have the development teams being split on different sites or even different countries. What type of system is being developed? Plan-driven approaches really are for systems that require a lot of analysis before implementation. Real-time systems with complex timing requirements, things that might be critical. Another aspect to consider, what is the expected system lifetime? So if you're expecting it to be for a year or two and it's only a small one, if it's going to be something that's going to be for a lifetime, for really a long lifetime, then you're going to require more design documentation to communicate the original intentions of the systems developers to the support team. I mean, this was one of the issues with Y2K. They had very little documentation, and they did not expect those systems to last a lifetime. They were just designed as fairly short-term type of systems. And what kind of technologies are available to support systems development? Now, Agile methods rely on good tools to keep track of the evolving design. So if they have very few tools or they don't have good tools, then it makes it much harder. Another aspect to consider is how is actually the development team organised. If the team is distributed or if some of the development is being outsourced, then design documents for communication across the development teams is really a necessity. There are also cultural and organisational issues that could affect the systems development. For instance, traditional engineering organisations use plan-based development because this is the norm in engineering. I certainly know that, I don't know whether they still do that, but in the MOD it used to be that it was very much plan-driven. In fact, it was not just plan-driven, it was waterfall, step by step. So, it makes it much harder if you have that kind of culture. How good are the designers and programmers and the development team? That's another consideration. And it is often argued that Agile methods require higher skill levels than plan-based approaches. And because in plan-based approach, sometimes the program is simply translate a detailed design into code. But, really the skill set should be there regardless of what methodology and what approach you use. However, in Agile methods, you have to think a lot more. You have to solve the problem because there isn't a step-by-step instruction and there isn't detailed design to go from design into code. Is the system subject to external regulation? That's another aspect that one has to consider. For instance, if the system has to be approved by external regulators for software that's critical for aircraft, software that's critical for NASA, any aspect like that, then it's got to be, you are going to be expected to produce detailed documentation as part of the system to ensure safety. Then we'll cover some of the methodologies in a bit more detail. Let's have a look at the kinds of plan-driven and agile methodologies that exist. For plan-driven, you have SSADM, RUP, which is the Rational Unified Process, PSP, which is the Personal Software Process, and TSP, which is the Team Software Process. SSADM is Systems Analysis and Design Methodology, which was the standard for UK government. In the methodologies that come under the Agile approach, you have XP, which is the Extreme Programming. You have ASD, which is the Adaptive Software Development. FDD, Feature-Driven Development. AUP, Agile Unified Process. Crystal methodology. You also have DSDM, Dynamic Systems Development Method, which is the UK-based one. Now, as I've mentioned before, Scrum is often put into this category, but Scrum is not a methodology. It's more a project management tool. System design or systems development is a complex process, and if you add external factors such as the human element, developer, user, stakeholder, and the application and factors such as tools and techniques and skills, you indeed have a complex system in its own right. Now, the analogy of the chaos theory in Crichton's Lost World, if you've ever read it or seen the film, that springs to mind. Only at the edge of chaos can complex systems exist. Crichton, 1995. Okay, to make a comparison to the chaos theory may seem a bit melodramatic, but the parallel is not so far-fetched. As technology advances and people's expectations grow, the result is more and more complex systems. Even just simple interface design seem complex, and interface design and development is no exception. So a system needs to be adaptable, having the ability to have a balance between the need for order and the need for change. It has to be adaptable to meet changing user requirements, dependent on software and hardware. It has to have some form of order to aid the user visually. It has to functionally equate with the requirements whilst maintaining a degree of conformance. However, it also requires the ability to change. It needs to have that. To change, to evolve, to enable a developer some freedom and at the same time keep up with the ever-changing technology and user demands. Gould in 1995 said, "Innovation and creativity are still required in order to make a good system." Basically, as long as we follow a few basic rules of design, there's no need for us to give up.